Okay. We're in the 4th chapter of the book of John. I'm at that place in my life when I can't see with my glasses off, and I see worse with them on. So that's where I am this morning. John chapter 4, verse 15. Let me ask you a question. What's going on in your head this morning? What are you thinking about? What's going on? I mean, seriously, I don't want you to talk to me, but just think for a moment. What's going on? You know, what are you planning? What are you thinking about? What are you dreaming about? Those sorts of things. And the reason I'm asking that is because it's more important than you think what's going on in your head. It really makes a big difference in your spiritual life, what you're kicking around. Emerson said a man is what he thinks about all day long. And so in other words, what you think about is what you are. Just throw that around. Marcus Aurelius, one of the Roman emperors, put it this way. He said, a man's life is what his thoughts make of it. So our thoughts really matter. You know what they tell us, psychologists tell us that we have this ongoing internal conversation with ourselves. It's just always running. When you're doing something else, that little conversation just spinning. You're talking to yourself, you're analyzing, you're debating, you're having, this little running conversation. And that little running conversation is extremely important to your spiritual life, because if it's always running in the negative or in the lustful or the bitter, or if it's in some, you're angry, or that really has an impact on your life, on your existence. So it really matters. A.W. Tozer said, the widest thing in the universe is not space. It's the potential capacity of the human heart. Because we're made in the image of God, and it is capable of almost unlimited extension in all directions. And one of the world's greatest tragedies is that we allow our hearts to shrink until there is room in them for little besides ourselves. Now, if you will think with me for a moment, the Lord has put a lot of people in your life. There's a lot of folks. Good relationships. You get to bump into all kinds of people. And in your life, as you go through your life, you have all these folks in your circle. And they add richness and quality and beauty to your life. That's what these people do. But yeah, as life bumps along the road, sometimes we get crossways with people. And when we do, we take them people out of our circle and we set them on the outside of our circle. Anybody know what I'm talking about? You're no longer in here. You go out here. And the sad thing about that is that if we're not careful, we will come to a place where our circle has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller until finally there's nobody in it but just you. And the people that have gotten to that place, and there's a lot of them around, that life is miserable and they're bitter because they've put everybody else out of their circles. They didn't measure up, and now they're all alone. William James said, the greatest discovery of my generation is that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind. You can change your life by the way you think. And now, who controls that internal conversation? Who has control of that? You do. You can take it down a road, or you can take it back. In other words, you control that inner being, that inner thought process. And so it's important that you know that, as the Bible says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Now today, the story that I'm going to hang this sermon around, or the frame around this sermon, is the story of the Jewish people. Now the Jewish people, if you remember, they were in Egypt, and they came to the Promised Land. All right? They stayed there a long time. They were very prosperous. King David brought them very forward to the height of beauty and richness and power, as high as the Jews ever got. But later on, things began to kind of thin out again. And the nation down in Iraq, Babylon, they came and they laid siege to the whole city area of Palestine. And they took back with them to Babylon the richest, the most intelligent, the artists, the politicians, the teachers. They took all of the intelligentsia and the beautiful artisans of the Jewish people, all the good folks, and they took them back with them to Babylon. They made them hostages, and they took them home. And they left in the promised land the less intelligent, the less artistic, they left normal folks like us back there in the promised land. Now, when the Jews spent their time down in Babylon, the Lord, moved on the scene and allowed them to come back home. They came back home, they rebuilt their temple, they restored their farms and their lands, and they came back home. And they settled, of course they left from the south in Jerusalem, they call Judea, and it's in the southern part of Palestine. And so when they came back home, they went back down into the south and settled back around Jerusalem, rebuilt it, etc. Now while they were gone, the people in the land who stayed, the Jews who stayed, they began to intermarry with the people around them. And they began to create a half-mongrel Jewish, half-Jew, half-native. They watered down the Jewish line. And not only that, but they moved and built a new temple in Samaria. They didn't come down to Judah anymore, in Jerusalem and worship. They built a temple up in the north. And that those half-Jews who sold out, I think of them as those that sold out, they stayed, and so they built them a temple up in the north. Now, at this time, and then when the Jews came home from Babylon, they didn't like the half-breeds. They didn't like the Samaritans anymore, because those folks sold out, cheapened their lines, married, and you get it. The pure Jews who stayed pure and went through the trial of Babylon came home. Those who stayed home, they didn't like them. So you get that point. Now, that brings us to our story today, because the Samaritans are going to play a huge role in this story today. And so we're going to pick up in verse 4. It says, "Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John." So the Pharisees are these really religious Jews, and they like to kind of gossip and talk, and so they said, well, Jesus, he's getting more disciples than John the Baptist. And Jesus and John didn't care. They had that all sorted out. But there was beginning to create some confusion, some political unrest, as people tried to figure this out. So Jesus had an idea, and he said, verse 3, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea in the south, and he moved to Galilee up in the north. He wanted to put some distance between the people who were trying to create a problem. John and Jesus didn't have a problem, but Jesus said, I'm going to move up to Galilee, up around the Sea of Galilee, up in the north. All right, you with me so far? Now, so what that picks us up, that brings us to verse 4. In verse 4, we find that Jesus had to go. He was going to Galilee, but he went straight through Samaria to get there. Now, the odd thing about that is the Jewish people, because of the animosity between the two groups, they wouldn't walk through Samaria. They'd walk around it. They didn't want to, and part of their religion also forbade them from having contact with Gentiles. And so it was a religious thing, but it was also kind of a personal vendetta, a little grudge they were holding. So the Jews would walk around Samaria to get to their places up in the north. So Samaria's in the way, and they'd walk around. So now we pick up verse 4. Because Jesus, on his way to Galilee, he said, John records for us, that Jesus said he needed to go through Samaria. He needed to go through Samaria. Now, why did Jesus want to go through Samaria? And I'll tell you why. He had a divine appointment. There was somebody in Samaria he wanted to see on his way, so he had to go through. Would you read with me verse 4? Now, he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Okay, so you get the point now. He went through Samaria to Sychar, and he was going by this well that was dug by one of the founders of the Jewish nation, Jacob. Okay, so we're going to go this place. Now, how do you think folks traveled in Jesus' day? Well, you didn't take a bus or a plane or drive a car. If you wanted to go somewhere, you walked. or rode a donkey or something like that. And if you've ever ridden a donkey, walking's about as good. You know? And they went to Samaria. Now, so well, let's keep reading verse 6. I think it's verse 6. You'll have to forgive me. Just where we stopped. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. Now, let's stop there a moment. See, when did he start walking? Well, as soon as it got daylight. 6 o'clock? I don't know. So he started walking 6 o'clock. It's now noon. He's been walking all morning. We don't know if he had anything to eat. We don't know if he had anything to drink. But he was tired. Obviously, I would be too, thirsty. So he went to this well that everybody knew about, had been a Jewish well for forever and ever. He went there and he sat down and he wanted to drink. Now, let's pick up where we stopped at that point. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" And then, in quotes, his disciples had gone into town to buy food. They'd heard there's a good new McDonald's in town, so they, you know. So Jesus sat down by the well, and he was thirsty, and he was by himself. All right. Now I want to show you a couple of problems that are cultural here that Jesus is dealing with. Number one, Jewish men did not speak to a woman in public. They just didn't do it. And there's a group of Jewish people called the bruised and bleeding. I love this. They tickle me with it. And what they would do was, they're men, very pious. When they walked through town, they wouldn't even look at a woman, much less speak to one. So when they saw a woman meeting them on the street, they'd close their eyes and keep walking. See why they're called the bruised and bleeding? Yeah. They ran into stuff all the time. So here's Jesus, and he's by this well in Sychar, Jacob's old well, and he's there, and he just talks right to a woman. He speaks to her. Not only was she a woman, she was a Samaritan. All right, so you get the conflict here of what's going on. Let's pick up verse 9. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" Or, "Why are you asking me for a drink?" For Jews did not associate with Samaritans. Now, what we have to get here is Jesus is trying to create a conversation with this woman. He has come here to talk to her directly. Divine appointment. Jesus knew how important it was that he talked to that woman. So he went through Samaria to talk to her. And so we find here this communication, because there's not a lot of common ground for these two to talk to each other, because they're so culturally crossways. All right, so Jesus begins to use something from a common denominator so that they both can talk about it. So he says in verse 10, I think it's 10, Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." So here he is. He says to this woman, "Woman, give me a drink." And she said, "What are you doing talking to me?" And then he said, "Lady, if you knew who I was, if you just knew who was talking to you, you'd break your neck to get me a glass of water. Yeah. Now, you'd do anything." Because he said, "Because I could give you water that's alive, living water." So you see what he's doing? He's trying to create a conversation. And so let's keep going and see what he says. So the woman, they were missing, you know. She was talking on one level, Jesus was talking on another level, and he's trying to get them on the same level. So he keeps going on, and he says, "Sir," the woman said, "you've nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock?" In other words, where is this water going to come from that you're going to give me? Right? Because this well is deep and you don't have anything to draw with, and you're talking about living water, and so there's a big question. And now, have you noticed that when God comes to our lives with information, or when he comes to give us a new idea or a new thought, the first thing that happens to us is we get all kinds of questions. Our faith has to grow whenever Jesus comes and gives us new information. Our faith has to grow a little bit. And so this woman, she's trying to grow a little faith here, trying to figure this out. So she starts out with a question. So she was talking about physical things. Jesus was talking about spiritual things. Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water, H2O, I'm sure he just points at the well. Anyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. So he says, what I want to give you, lady, is not just a drink of water that you're going to get thirsty from again. When I give you the water I'm talking about, you will never be thirsty again. And not only that, but this water I give you is going to spring up in your life and flow out of your life, and it's going to touch your family, it's going to touch your neighbors, it's going to do everywhere you go. This water is going to flow out of your life. See, he's talking spiritual things. Now the woman, of course, she didn't get it. But she's getting closer. She says, the woman said to him, sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. Give me some. See, she was, she's still talking in a different level, but she said, give me some of this water. That way I won't have to come out here every day and draw water for my family. Give me some of this. Jesus then begins to take this story, an analogy, and he's going to show her that her real needs in her life are not physical, but her real needs are spiritual. And I'm going to tell you this morning, you may think your real needs in this life are a new car, or a different job, or a different spouse, or a better children. You may think all of it, but your needs are not physical. Your needs are spiritual. And you sense that, or you wouldn't be here this morning. So let's come with us now, come with Jesus, as he begins to move this woman to a confrontation. Move her to a level where he brings her up. Now he says, he told her, okay, go call your husband and come back. I have no husband, she said. Okay, see, Jesus, he kind of went right to the problem. Have you noticed that when Jesus comes to us, he always just goes right to the problem? Now, what happens when somebody gets too close to a problem in my life, or gets to crowding me on an issue I'm not comfortable with? I'll say, what about those Cardinals? Yeah, boy, they're playing good ball this year. Old Carpy retired, and and all this. I'll try to change the subject. Do you do that? Yeah. Somebody comes and gets close to me, I just change the subject. Well, this lady did the same thing. So Jesus said, hey, go call your husband and come back. Well, I don't have a husband, she replied. Let's keep reading. Jesus said to her, you're right when you say you have no husband. In fact, the fact is you had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. What you have just said is quite true. Oh my. Jesus knew something about this lady that she didn't know. Now, I want you to notice something here. You've got to see this. Jesus is not condemning her for having had 5 husbands. He's not condemning her at all. He's simply stating the fact that she's had 5 husbands, but the guy she's living with now, she's not married to. That's what he means. All right? He just wanted her to know that. He didn't judge her. He wasn't condemning her. Now, we all know that multiple relationships create huge chaos in families and in lives. And the best thing for us is to stay monogamous, married to one person for a whole life. That's the best. That's the goal. That doesn't always work out that way, and we know that. We live in a real world. And so it gets more complicated, more complicated, more complicated. But Jesus wasn't judging. He simply said to her, lady, you're right. You don't have a husband, but you had 5 before this one. All right, here we go. Now the woman realized, this woman, the clue phone rung and she picked it up. She got a clue. She said, the woman said, I can just see her, like David did, She said, I can see you're a prophet. You're not normal. Or you wouldn't have known this about me, see? Okay. You are different. So the woman then began to change the subject, as I said. And she began to talk about the long-running dispute between Jews and Samaritans. Instead of talking about her problems, her relationship problems with all those husbands, okay? Have you noticed that there was a common denominator in all those divorces? What was the common denominator? The same woman. Is the clue phone ringing?
Yeah.
Okay. The problem was the woman. She's probably too hard to live with.
Good.
Come on, come on, you with me? You getting it? Okay, I don't want to just spell this out for you. Okay, let's go on then. So, she began to talk about this, but it was too painful, so she just said in verse, I'm sorry, I think it's verse 20, our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. Oh, what about them cardinals? Change the subject. Let's don't talk about me, let's talk about something else. Now, as I told you, when the real Jews, the faithful Jews, had gone down to Babylon, the Jews that stayed, they went to Samaria and built them a temple up there. So she said, well, you Jews say we worship in Jerusalem, but us Samaritans, we worship in Samaria. And some say this is the place we ought to worship. You say you ought to worship here. Where do we? You know, she tried to change the subject, and Jesus said this, because he talked about something we needed to hear. He said, woman, Jesus replied, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know. For salvation is from the Jews. Now, he wasn't being mean there. He was simply, he wasn't saying, well, we're better than you. Salvation is going to come from the Jews, not from you Samaritans. He wasn't saying that at all. He was saying that Jesus, the Messiah, is of Jewish origin. He comes through the Jewish people. That's all he was saying. Okay, and he's going to even get more clear with that in a moment. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and His worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. Let me say to you this morning, it doesn't matter if you worship the Lord in a cow barn or a cathedral. It doesn't matter where you worship the Lord. You can worship the Lord going down the road in a car, washing dishes in your house, hunting, fishing. I mean, you can worship the Lord everywhere and anywhere you are. It doesn't matter, because true worship is in spirit and in truth. It's not where we are, it's what we are and how we are. Okay? Shake your head like this if you're getting it. All right. So Jesus said, real worship is not connected to a place. And then he says that salvation, or the real Messiah, will come through the Jewish people. Now, he's about to say something here that's going to blow your socks off. The woman says, I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming, and when He comes, He'll explain everything to us. She said, okay, which mountain is it? And Jesus said, well, it's spiritual. She said, well, I know that, but when Jesus comes, He'll tell us which mountain to worship on. And then Jesus looked her right in the eye. I could just see this. And He said, lady, the guy talking to you right now is the Messiah. How about that? How about them apples?
She wanted to talk about mountains.
She wanted to talk about mountains, and she was standing before the God of the universe. She was speaking to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords and the Prince of Peace, the Son of God, Jesus. And He was the one. And he said, somebody said, well, Jesus never claimed to be Messiah. Oh, I believe He did right there, didn't He? He said, the one you've been looking for, I'm Him. All right, let's keep going. Now, we go through our lives, and you and I, completely unaware of the divine presence of God that's with us all the time. God is with you all the time. Every day, everywhere you go, He's with you. And He knows everything about you. There's not one thing about you that God doesn't know. How many husbands you've had, how many wives you've had, how many jobs you've had, how many, cows you got, how many fleas are on your dog. God knows everything about you. Now, so, what is it that He knows for sure? Well, first of all, we know He knows everything we say. It says in Psalm, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Matthew 12:36, but I tell you that men will have to give account on the day of judgment for every careless word they've spoken. For by your words you'll be acquitted, and by your words you'll be condemned. In other words, our words really matter. Choose them carefully. Choose your words carefully. Because when you say, what you say really matters. Where does what you say come from? From your mind, from that internal conversation. We started there, remember? Now we've got to the mouth. So make sure what you're thinking is right, because it's going to come out in your mouth. Okay, let's keep going. Our words really matter. So Jesus knows everything we say. He also knows how blind we are spiritually. He knows that we're locked into a physical world, and we see things here better than we do spiritual things. We don't understand spirituality because we're locked in physicality. You with me? So he said those things matter. The woman didn't get it, and they misunderstood. Nicodemus didn't get it. Nicodemus talked about getting to heaven. Jesus said, you got to be born again. You know, it was like he was trying to bring us up. There was an article in a newspaper that said the Christian Communications Laboratory relates the story of a small Midwestern weekly paper which ran a story where they say, we're pleased to announce that the cyclone which blew away the Methodist Church last Friday did no real damage to the town. See, they didn't mean it like that, but our words matter. It matters what you say. Okay. God knows, though, that's all. He also knows our lifestyles. He knows how we live. He knows our choices. See, this woman, she said, I don't have a husband. He said, yeah, you're right. You had 5. And the guy you're living with now is not your husband. So he knew that. But he was using that to open the door. Now, you may have convinced yourself that by American 21st century American standards, you are an average Christian. You may have convinced yourself that. But let me tell you this. There's a huge difference between average and normal. Average Christianity in America is not normal. It is far superior, inferior. The American morals, the American way of life, our lifestyles have sunk way low. And you may think you're an average Christian, but folks, you're not normal. Unless you have stepped up above your culture. If you're just like everybody around you, you're average. Well, good for you, but you're not normal in the sight of God. And we need to move up. We need to rise up to His standards. God knows everything about us, our lifestyle. He knows our every sin and our every failure. He knows everything about us. Adam and Eve. Adam got staying out late at nights. And Eve got worried. And she said, Adam, where have you been? Well, I've just been out hanging around, talking, with the animals. She got worried. She said, are you sure you're not looking for some... Adam said, Eve, there isn't any other woman. You're the only woman on the planet. A night or two later, he was awakened in the middle of the night by something tickling. And he got to look at it. Eve was counting his ribs. Oh, but you didn't know God made the hair out of his one of his ribs? Somebody said, if you have to explain them, it just kind of... Now, I want to close. I'm out of time and I want to close. I want to tell you something else God knows about us. He knows our love affair with religion. He knows how much we love it. See, this woman was in love with her religion. Whenever Jesus got close to her, what'd she do? She turned the conversation to religion. She said, oh, well, no, we worship here in this mountain. You worship in that mountain. And the problem is, folks, religion is the very thing that will keep you from God. It's the very thing that will drive a wedge between your success as a believer and your failure as a believer. Religion is a negative connotation. We believe in relationships. She was standing before the King of Kings, the Messiah, and she wanted to talk about churches. Now, if you want to talk about denominations and church buildings and stained glass and carpet, you know what? That's going to drive you from the Lord. It's not about those things. It's about spirit and truth. How are you inside? How are you with the Lord? That's what matters. We have a desperate need for Jesus, and He knows this. The thing that thirsty woman needed more than anything else in the world was Jesus. I wonder why she came out there at noon. Had you thought about that? What was a woman doing out there at noon? All the women in town came out in the morning and in the evening. Why did she come at noon? Because she got tired of hearing their... Yeah. 5 husbands? Do you think they talked about it? She came out at noon to get away from those other women. What her real need was, it wasn't water. She needed some self-respect. She needed some forgiveness. She needed some hope. And Jesus was there to give her living water that would meet her every need and flow out of her life into everybody else's life around her. I guess what I want you to do is watch what you say. Stop talking about inferior things when God comes around and start listening to Him on that deeper level. Because that's where things get changed. You don't change from the outside in. You're changed from the inside out. Let's pray. Lord.